Up, I'm going to welcome to the stage Mendoza, a game designer and writer living in New York. He's written on narrative design, lo-fi culture, and experimental multiplayer games, co-hosted the 7-day Brogue-like game jam in tribute to previous roguelike celebration speaker Michael Brogue, and is currently writing an interactive fiction about postural hypertension? Hypotension. Very interesting. His favorite genres are coffee break, roguelikes, and manic shooters. And topics of special interest for him are logistics, compression, irreversibility, anisotropy, and symmetry breaking. Did I say all those words correctly? Hopefully, I did.
Yeah, so this is the use of knowledge in the labyrinth, the price mechanism as a storytelling device. So, imagine you come out of the dungeon. There's the merchant parked just outside. You see on their signboard that Tarsieri amulets are now fetching double the usual asking price. So, what could this mean? Is it growing superstition among the locals? Was the princess spotted wearing one? Is the government subsidizing, hunting tarsiers? There's an infestation, and they're, subsidizing collecting their eyeballs. Or maybe when you were lost in the jungle, hacking your way through, you deforested it, put them on the endangered species list. Or maybe there actually is some evil, nasty thing out there, and it's not just superstition. Maybe you should get some insurance. So I'm going to talk about price signaling. So the name of this talk is a play on a famous economics paper published in 1945 called The Use of Knowledge in Society. So it's sort of talking about the function of prices and how prices, Hayek calls these quantitative indices that are able to compress and transmit complex information and have it move across large networks efficiently. So the way that this functions, you could almost think of as cybernetic in that local, low context adjustments evolve equilibria. And Hayek liked it. He was an Austrian school economist, kind of libertarian. He thought that individuals would be incentivized to leverage their specific knowledges. So there's a lot of inferences you can draw from motions of prices in a market. You could think of prices as a kind of Ansible or faster than light telecommunications device. And you could also think of them maybe as a kind of cryptographic hash where any change in the underlying data, the conditions and facts of the world results in a significant change in kind of the cipher, which would be the numbers that are the prices. And prices kind of spare the details. You're not sure if a change in a price was due to a change in supply, a change in demand, but it still gives you enough information to maybe act on. So some of the information that prices can encode, which is a lot. It's like resource distribution, in a roguelike, maybe the scarcity of different resources, changes from game to game. So you could infer something about that. The beliefs of different communities, maybe somebody marking up or discounting a price for you based on your class or race, the political situation, which industries are subsidized, maybe collusion, people who have cornered a market on a commodity or an industry, and of course the repercussions of the player's own actions. So you could also use prices as a kind of quest hook, a sort of tacit quest hook, where instead of somebody coming up to you at the tavern and telling you about something they want you to take care of, some trolls, holed up in a cave or whatever, you can make inferences from price motions to try and see what's going on in the world and intercede. So you could think of the adventurer in this more kind of old-fashioned way as like an amoral opportunist, who travels around and gets involved in affairs they maybe shouldn't. It gives the player a kind of window to act before all the facts are established. So there's this kind of natural risk reward if their hunches, prove fruitful or not. Player could buy or sell tips. Prices could indicate secrets or the activities of different NPCs or factions. And it can also feed into the traditional roguelike item identification minigame, where you could maybe verify the provenance of an item, so-and-so's, legendary scabbard, whatever. Or maybe an item is cursed, somebody's trying to get rid of it for cheap. So I want to talk about Pathologic. Pathologic is an RPG that takes place in one town. And the player is a healer who comes to the town right before a plague breaks out. And after the first day, news of the plague has spread, prices skyrocket, people are panicking and scalping things, and you might actually tell that the news of the plague has spread around just because of these now ridiculously high prices that anybody actually saying so directly to you. And so these now really almost unaffordable items kind of funnel the player into Pathologic's bartering minigame, where they have to make trades with these different sectors of society, women, men, children, who all have and want different things. And it kind of works in this almost intransitive loop. The player has a reputation per district that can vary, and having a higher reputation in a district can lead to discounts. So this all kind of affects how the player plans their route through the town on a given day, their itinerary, when they have these other errands to run, people to meet, might want to, stop off at the playground to trade a sewing needle to a kid for some medicine. So there are multiplayer games that, some of which are these kind of free market simulators like Off-World Trading Company and Mule, that kind of tell their stories through the movements in prices in a free market where these commodities are being traded. And there's the 18XX series of train games and their descendants, like the PAX series, and Splatters games like Indonesia or Food Chain Magnate. So these games have stock markets. They have all these financial options, ways to screw over other players. And since whoever has the most money at the end wins, there's the question of, do you reinvest or pocket your profits? There's also some kind of single-player, multiplayer games that have come out more recently, like the so-called looter shooters or extraction games. Cruel World, you could think of like these terminals that allow you to do things like save your game, and they get harder to use as more players play. So it's this kind of congestion, almost like an anti-infrastructure or inflation. At Root, there's the Vagabond, who's kind of profiting from these other warring factions, doing this kind of item trading game. So 868 Hack, Michael Bros roguelike 868 Hack, has two currencies, credits and energy. And so when you use a program, like a spell in the game, you're spending credits and or energy. And so that makes the costs complex. Just a lot fuzzier, a lot harder to kind of min-max and optimize. It becomes a sort of multi-objective optimization problem. Going for a high score like you do in that game, just a note about, thinking about score as maybe, the points as representing the intrinsic value as opposed to instrumental value. Another hacking themed game, Netrunner, has this card Magnum Opus, where it says essentially that you can spend one click or one action resource for a credit. So that kind of establishes this fact that one click is worth, on average, about 2 credits. I don't know if I said that right before. 1 click, 2 credits. So that kind of acts as this valuation heuristic that you can use for the rest of the game, like the relative value of chess pieces. So it might be good to think about having these kinds of things that sort of establish these frames of reference for cost-benefit analysis. So some caveats. Prices can be very volatile. They can be chaotic. They can definitely disturb game balance. You might want to just set prices for items by fiat, as the designer, not have them be too organically, variable, especially if the player can find exploits. The player, might be hard to get them to think in terms of quotients and rates, when looking at these like absolute numbers that are the prices. So you might need some other tools or aids to help them think like that. There are, some counterexamples of games like Go, where, it's just this sort of primordial territorial auction where players are competing over space, and it's just about positioning and shape, and there's no money to help do things more efficiently. So it might be more intuitive sometimes to think, kind of spatially and in terms of situations and puzzles, than in terms of these sort of fluctuating parameters. So you might not want the player to get out the abacus and do this kind of objective function calculus. You might want to focus on this more kind of concrete combinatorial situations. So games are able to communicate really interesting things through dynamical systems, but they have the benefit of kind of wrapping these economic concepts and discussions in these kind of like puzzle situations, these sort of first person stories that the player can insert themselves into, and introducing things like fluctuating prices in a market could possibly lead away from that kind of presence, in a situation. Prices can be very powerful tools for tacitly doing storytelling, communicating things about the goings on in the world, but their kind of algebraic abstraction can actually make it kind of problematic to compare apples to oranges. You can also think of prices as a kind of shortcut that collapses space-time, and there are other things that can function like that. It could be markets, but it could be cyberspace, like in Netrunner, sort of what lets a lone individual hacker interact with a giant mega corporation, or it could be magic, which a lot of the times it is, that kind of does that collapsing of space-time. And so you might want to think about whether it would be redundant to have prices in a market on top of a magic system, or what. Maybe there's other things too that could function in this way. So worth thinking about. Here's some other just kind of miscellaneous notions if you're thinking about markets, prices, economics, some different kind of shops you could have, and some other games to look at, digital and tabletop. Definitely recommend checking out a lot of tabletop games out there. They are, really good resource for exploring economic ideas in game form. And that's my talk. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm so glad we did it. You were perfect that time. No hitches. I'm super glad that we made that work because that was really interesting and really cool. Because like people were talking about, price as a hint is part of old roguelikes because of the identification of like this is 30 gold, therefore it's potentially a scroll of identify, but that is not telling you about the world as much as it's an extra little puzzle solving technique. So I think taking that a step further is interesting. It reminds me of something that came up in the preview talk and yesterday as well about how some games have started to narrativize elements of the mechanics that have been around for purely mechanical reasons but not commented on so much, like the repetitive death. And so interesting to be able to comment on basically like balancing issues or like balancing techniques potentially within the narrative of your game.
Yeah. I do think it could be interesting to look at, what if you just had prices to communicate some of these things? Don't have to like maybe put on top all these other kinds of systems that aren't as natural to like how normal like roguelikes are normally kind of programmed or architected. But yeah, and I think it also maybe sort of indicates a more kind of social like world, more agents who are interacting and kind of having inputs into a like a shared kind of infrastructural thing.
Right. Step one of thinking about the pricing of a dungeon would be thinking about why there is a shopkeeper on level 6 of the death dungeon, which is a string that if you start to unravel it, like you better commit to a bunch of world building.
Yeah, it could definitely get like, where does it stop? Like, maybe make the players a little more paranoid than.
Yeah, which someone mentioned Delicious in Dungeon, which I think is playing with some of these ideas of thinking about what that means and like the supply chain problems. Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Robin. I'm so glad. Thanks for being very patient, waiting through all the other talks to be able to give this a second try. But yeah, really glad that we got that talk, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for letting me go again. Glad it worked out.
Yeah, excellent.